So don't worry about the past. Now, in terms of more concrete, there's this wonderful document from the Congregation of Education, The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality and Education Within the Home. And I think this is just the absolute best document for parents in helping them to understand not only their own sexuality and their own union, but how to pass it on to the next generation, to their children.
Hello and welcome back to HLI Ireland's Let's Talk. This is the weekly show that looks at all things life, faith and family through a Catholic lens. So folks, we are into a new month, which means a new theme. And this month's theme is Men Called to Greatness. I am really pleased to have a very special guest with us today. We are going to feature Dr. Rob McNamara. Dr. Rob is a lecturer. He is a doctorate in philosophy and he teaches at the Franciscan University of Steubenville in the USA, but he is originally from Galway. So I'm delighted to welcome you, Rob. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. It's good to be here. Thanks for offering this interview. I'm glad to have a chat with you.
It's really exciting actually to have someone of your caliber. Now, that's not to denigrate any of the rest of our guests. We have had brilliant guests over the series so far. But I think you're a really interesting one because you are now based in America, right at the heart of the learning institutions, the Catholic institutions there in the USA. I think it was Father Brenton Kilcoyne called it Catholic Disneyland. So you're joining us from Catholic Disneyland, Steubenville there.
Yeah, it's a real treat to work here and have found myself here, a great blessing for me personally. And the Franciscan University students are a wonderful student body, typically walking around campus with smiles on their face and of course a deep faith. And so it's a great joy to be here, especially with my family and the students witnessing to us and us growing in the faith through that. And
Amazing.
Coming from an Irish context where very few young people have managed to hold the faith and develop a deep personal faith, it's wonderful to see that witness of 20-year-olds who are joyful in it. Yeah, absolutely wonderful.
Do your heart good. Well, Rob, tell us, let's take a wee step back and tell us then, you said you're originally from Galway. How did you end up, well, as a doctor in philosophy, and then how did you end up across the water?
Yeah, so after I left university, I worked as an engineer for a number of years in Galway. I'd studied physics originally, but during that period, I had experienced a deep reversion to the faith, or a deep return to the faith, and in consequence became voraciously interested in the wonderful wealth of the faith that was our inheritance, that for some reason, even as Irish, as Catholic, as schooled in Catholic schools, didn't really understand or didn't really take to myself personally. But then in my early 20s, when I did, I realized there was a wealth here, a wealth that I could enter into. And so gradually through that process began studying theology first, discovering in my theological studies that you have to do philosophy to do good theology, and then found myself more at home in philosophical studies. In consequence of this, then I eventually went to Austria to study at the International Theological Institute, which was an academically rigorous and orthodox Catholic institute. And then I entered seminary for a period in Ireland in Maynooth, studied more philosophy there. And when I left seminary after discerning that God was not calling me to the priesthood, I began doctoral studies under Dr. Mette Lebec and finished them a few years ago. During the process of those doctoral studies, I was invited to teach just a couple of courses at Franciscan at their study abroad campus. And gradually through those courses became a more permanent faculty member and found my way to the United States, to the main campus here.
Brilliant. Wow. It's quite a story, you know, as you said, coming from now a largely secularized Ireland, and not only reverting to the faith, but reverting in such an immense way, which is so interesting. I want to delve more into that whole idea of the philosophy and theology. But the theme this month, as I said before, is Men Called to Greatness. And I know that you, in your work, and I actually saw your episode on Pints with Aquinas, you talk very much about the influence of John Paul II and his early writings as Karol Wojtyla particularly the document or the book, Love and Responsibility. And I'd love you to share a little bit about why that book drew you in and back to the faith as a man. I really want to like sort of home in on what the difference it is, because we've spent a few weeks talking about the dignity of woman, and obviously I'm a woman, and I can very easily, you know, drop into the tea in the chat and we can see the faith from a very feminine perspective. But I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. Why, as a young man, that drew you in, and what you were wrestling with, and even in terms of human sexuality and your whole identity as a human being. And I think you have a great line that you might share with us relating to being called to greatness.
Yeah. So immediately when you contacted me about this chat, this line from Love and Responsibility came to mind, and we'll come to that in a moment. But to understand this in relation to my own life story, around the time I was returning to the faith, Pope St. John Paul II was Holy Father, and I encountered in his person a man of great integrity, a man who lived the fullness of masculinity as a man, as a teacher, as a philosopher, and eventually as priest, bishop, and Holy Father. So the witness of his life had a very powerful impact upon me. When I then discovered that he'd written these wonderful works on human sexuality, first Love and Responsibility, and then The Theology of the Body, and I began reading those works, I discovered that there was a window into the faith through the love of man and woman that immersed you in a Catholic worldview. And so I really experienced my re-entry into the depth of the faith through his person, the witness of him as a man, and then through his writings, the witness of the clarity, the purity, the precision, the depth of his writings. And the line then that you mentioned that we spoke about before we started recording, that late somewhere midway or 2/3 of the way through Love and Responsibility, in a section on reproduction and parenthood, he speaks about man reconciling himself to his natural greatness. And I can't remember the line exactly, but we must reconcile ourselves to our natural greatness. And here he's really speaking about the natural greatness also of human sexuality, the natural greatness of being a man, of being a woman, and the power that's embedded in that to create life together with God the Father. And it seems that this power is so immense to us that we tend to fall back before it, tend to cower before it. We fail to take responsibility for this greatness because we fail to recognize it as a greatness. And you can see this in all sorts of ways, the inability we have in the contemporary age to enter into stable relationships, the inability to enter into marriage, the inability to assume the responsibility of generating life within marriage, the inability to stay together with one spouse in the indissoluble union as marriage. And we fall back before these great responsibilities that are simultaneously great challenges to us. And as we flee them, then we have all of the problems that we discover, the problem that you deal with in Human Life International, the problem of abortion. So if we were to think about that for a moment, we'd see that there are so many abortions, but it's rarely because people want to kill children. That's not the motive for abortion. The motive for abortion doesn't seem to be the willing death of one's child, but rather the inability to take responsibility for the child, take responsibility for the rearing and education of the child. And because we're afraid of this responsibility, we want to end the life of the child. And so it seems to me then that the problem of abortion is less a problem of course, it's a problem of murder, the murder of children, but the background problem that creates the context for that is a problem assuming the responsibility of parenthood. Now, when we say it like that, it seems perhaps at first a task or a challenge. But what Pope St. John Paul II teaches us is that it's actually a glorious thing to be received in wondrous gratitude. So if we think about all of the things that we can do, all of the great development that humanity has wrought through time, all of the technology, and yet if we step back from that, embedded in our nature is this possibility to generate a new human person, to cooperate with God in the genesis of a human person. And there's evidently nothing more powerful than that. There's nothing more wondrous or perfect in all of creation than the human person. Of course, angelic persons as well, but in the visible world. And we have the possibility to perform this very simple loving act. And out of that loving act comes a child, a person who did not exist and will go on to exist for eternity, hopefully in the presence of God the Father. And this is an amazing possibility, truly wondrous, truly something to be, if properly understood, received with gratitude. But together with that gift, the gift of the child, comes, and you know this with having so many children, the immense responsibility of securing their life, providing for them, rearing them, teaching them about the world, teaching them about love, teaching them about the faith. It's an ever-present 24/7 task. And we're afraid of that. And because we're afraid of this, it seems to me that we fail to see the glory of procreation. And it's because of this, of course, that we use contraception or that we have recourse to abortion. So it seems to me embedded in that line is the seedbed of the answer to the problem, as well as the seedbed of the problem. If I don't reconcile myself to this greatness, I'll find myself in those awful situations. If I do, I begin to solve the problem of that, first in my own life, and then, of course, as a possible witness to others. It's actually possible to have 9 children, to be happy, to have a good life.
Wow, gosh, there's a lot in that and what you've just said. And I'm loving that whole idea of greatness, of power, and then that balance by the fear that's so prevalent in our society. And, you know, I loved as well, the line you said there, that the window into the faith through the love of a man and a woman. And I know Pope John Paul has often said that it's, you know, that we don't elevate, you know, love and the conjugal act enough. In this society, it's not that, you know, the church is always blamed by, you know, society of constantly, you know, going on about, they say, you know, the bedroom or whatever else, but we don't elevate enough the power and the glory and the responsibility. And I think men are crying out for that. That's what from my humble perspective, in society, you know, we're demasculizing men all the time, and we're minimizing their capabilities. And I think I'd also like to explore, because as I said, I listened to your interview with Matt Fradd, and one of the points that you talked about was, you know, the idea of man trying to exteriorly control human sexuality, and the danger that and you've mentioned already, like abortion and contraception there. Can you talk a little bit more about that, even from your own perspective of what it's like for a man then to have to get away from that exterior control to a real interior mastery?
When we discover the power of sexuality, it awakens. It's present, of course, from conception, but when we discover it as it awakens in the period of puberty, we discover it as an immensely powerful energy and dynamism in our being. And this power, of course, is sometimes very difficult to understand and very difficult to master. And of course, the teenage years are wrought with that difficulty, and we all know that difficulty personally. But it seems to me that that period of puberty is given to us so that we can, as it gradually awakens and gradually becomes a real orienting dynamism in life, gradually take hold of it, become master of my sexuality. And this is just one part of the development of the life of virtue. Because we're a fallen creature, our drives are wayward and often in competition with one another. And gradually, through the development of virtue, we bring all of those natural drives and desires into harmony and into the integrity of, I'll be a whole person. I won't be divided against myself. I won't be doing things I don't want to do. Like the line of St. Paul, I do the very things I do not want to do, and I do not do those things I want to do. We all experience that. Well, virtue is the answer to that. And in this sphere, the virtue of chastity. And so chastity capacitates me to take a hold of my sexuality, become master of it, so that it serves my person, so that it serves the person of my beloved, so that it serves our love, so that it serves the possibility that we have to rear our children. It doesn't act against me. I don't act against myself. Now, this, of course, is a great struggle. The great struggle, it seems to me, is empowered for us by the greatness of sexuality. We can become one with another, and out of that union create life together with God. So recognizing that truth, then we have to step back and we go, well, what do we do with this power? And of course, there are two ways of dealing with it in the contemporary age. I can, through virtue, master it from within, or I can, through technology, master it on the outside. So contraception renders the sexual act impotent of its procreative greatness, but it does so in an exterior manner. Or I can recognize in each moment that I'm engaging in sexual activity, I can become a father, or if I were a woman, I can become a mother. Now, what do I do with that recognition? Well, I take a hold of my sexual drive and desires, and I set them at the service of love. And part of our difficulty with, I suppose, reconciling ourselves to that greatness of procreativity is the difficulty of developing virtue. And we all know how difficult it is to be good. You wake every morning, say a prayer, resolve, today I will do good. And then we know that as the day begins to unfold with all of its distractions and busyness, we fail to love those who are closest to us, our spouse, our children, our friends, our family. So this mastery of self, this mastery of sexuality, then begins to open us to the wonder of everything sexual, its sacredness. And with its sacredness, then we can really promote it as something beautiful, something true, good, and beautiful, and something that God has destined for us as a gift. And of course, the way the church teaches in these areas is oftentimes, at least historically, prohibitive of the problems, so that you can stand in the domain of the goodness and the goodness of the gift. Chesterton has a great image about this. Sexuality is an immense power in life, and it's like a very vigorous dance. And you're dancing this dance on the top of a spire when you're engaging with someone in the sexual act. If the top of the spire is not surrounded by the secure wall of marriage, then you're afraid you'll fall off the edge in this dance. And often we experience the disaster when we do fall off the edge. Marriage secures that domain where sexuality can be itself, be this immense power, be this vigorous dance, without all of the problematic that comes along with it. So yeah, the church is really firm in its prohibitions here, but only because it wants to liberate sexuality to be itself, to be something good, true, beautiful, to be sacred, to be something that really builds up the spouses and their children.
Yeah, I think that's probably, in the church in Ireland, maybe over the last, 50 years, there's been such an emphasis on the prohibitive, and not necessarily, fair, but that's sort of the rap that the church has got, that it's constantly prohibitive. But the way that you're talking about, the beauty and the glory and what's available to us and the protection that it offers is what we're trying to emphasize to young people.
Yeah.
And I think I wanted to ask you again as well, the world would have us and have young men particularly, sell out that this is not possible, that this kind of life is not possible. It's not possible to master yourself, and you've just got to give into whether it's pornography or masturbation or whatever the vices are. The world would have you say that there's no point. But what, I imagine from you, and you have young children and you're teaching young people, you're trying to tell, the possibility. And I think it was a line you used again in the Matt Fradd interview about our faith, that it's real, it's tangible, and it's possible. And that's what we really need to emphasize to young people.
Yeah, it at first sight, if you're, I suppose, immersed by the culture that we live in, there's very little expectancy of the kind of mastery we're talking about. And in fact, it's often proposed that you live life healthier in the sexual sphere if you just give way to these sexual drives and desires and find outlets for them in what you said, masturbation, pornography, etc., casual sexual activity. But especially for a young man, and it seems to me that this is antithetical to our nature. Of course, to our fallen nature, there's something appealing in that. I just let go to all of these drives and desires. But to the deeper nature, where we understand that we want to take responsibility for others, we want to rise to the challenge. Young men want to be the hero. They read hero books. And without being challenged to take upon ourselves that responsibility, it seems to me that we're failing the younger generation. We're failing to recognize that actually it is possible. And just in terms of my own story, in living away from the church for a period, I understand that way of life very well in a close, visceral way. And I also understand the problems that come in human relationships because of that. And then I understand the difficulty that it is to move from that area of vice toward virtue. It is really a difficulty, but it certainly is possible. And if you see the truth on the horizon and you turn to Christ for the grace necessary in the moment to moment living of life, then you'll gradually step toward that way of being a person of integrity, a way of being a man who protects and provides for the woman who stands opposite him. And there will be many falls in that journey, and there'll be many fears to be met, and there'll be many difficulties. But if you persevere, it's eminently possible. The grace that Christ has for us in this area is absolutely immense. In Ephesians, St. Paul relates the sacrament of marriage to Christ's union with the church. And of course, the mystery of redemption is Christ's union with the church. That's where God saves us. And marriage is an earthly icon that sacramentally enables us to enter into that mystery. Now, obviously, God is going to have an immense pouring forth of grace in this area if we seek recourse to it. He's not going to leave us floundering in the problem if we turn to his truth in this matter. And it is important to turn to grace. Like there's two aspects here. There's a kind of heroic striving whereby you're acquiring virtue. And at the same time, there's the presence of God's grace to us, where he's lifting us up when we fall, returning us to the path, gradually purifying and healing, gradually strengthening. And it's in that cooperative activity, I think, that we learn a lot about our relationship with God. And young men most definitely need this. We were all aware of the phenomenon of Jordan Peterson, who speaks to young people about responsibility. And of course, Pope St. John Paul II in the late 1950s wrote the book Love and Responsibility. We all desire love. St. Augustine says, our one desire is to love and be loved. And Pope St. John Paul II then puts before us, well, to love and be loved is to assume responsibility for the other. Me for my wife, us together for our children. And in that, we discover, it seems to me, the depth of what it means to be human. And for a man, the depth of what it means to be masculine.
So have you advice then for, we would have a lot of mothers and fathers, parents watching this show. Have you advice for them on how to sort of try to instruct, particularly young men? Would you recommend reading Love and Responsibility? Is it accessible to, the ordinary Catholic, or is there anything else that you would, you spoke about grace being immense, so that's huge. But, a lot of our generation have made mistakes in the past, and they feel maybe either ill-equipped or maybe that they're, without, they haven't got their own experience to back up what they're trying to teach their children. Have you any advice sort of for that our generation speaking into young people and into this situation?
Yeah. I suppose the first piece of advice is when Christ redeems, he redeems us through and through. And of course, that's a gradual process, but it does really run through to the deepest layer of our personality. And that means it assumes all of our history also, and works that history into the story of our life, now not merely as a falling away from God, but as the place where God meets us, heals us, purifies us, and ultimately redeems us. So just like the wounds of Christ are glorious, those past indiscretions, those past sins, those past failings, they can all become part of the story of one's love with God. Why? Because God wants to save us through and through, right to the bottom of our personality and right throughout our history. So I would say, even if you have in the past acted in ways that are contrary to what you now know is good, what matters is now and into the future. In the book of Exodus, Moses says, I will be what I will be. God says to Moses, I will be what I will be. And it seems to me that God is telling us many things there, but one thing he's telling us is he meets us here in the present, and he wants a future with us, and he will redeem the past in that meeting in the present for our future. And as I said, it seems to me, at least personally, and from my many years of teaching, that the grace in this area is particularly immense because of the significance of marriage and the significance of family. So don't worry about the past. Now, in terms of more concrete, there's this wonderful document from the Congregation of Education, The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality and Education Within the Home. And I think this is just the absolute best document for parents in helping them to understand not only their own sexuality and their own union, but how to pass it on to the next generation, to their children. It contains a wonderful summary of church teaching in this area, and then speaks about all of the ways that this can be gradually through the course of time given to their children. And so that's, I think, the first place I'd recommend them to go. Then, of course, I would have loved if everyone read Love and Responsibility and the Theology of the Body. Sometimes they seem like imposing texts, but actually, if you take your time through them, they give an awful lot of fruit, and you won't be wasting any time with those works.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, I love the way you brought it round to that hope, and that's what we're always trying to encourage on this show, is that sense of hope, and that, to never to be just being downtrodden or being worn down by the pressures or the stresses, and obviously the challenges that all of the various ideologies are pushing down upon us.
Yeah.
I know you were just home on a visit to Ireland. Have you anything that, is there anything that you've seen, any green shoots or anything that you witnessed here that was either good or bad compared to what you're seeing and working with over in the States?
Yeah, so if you're a Catholic living in Ireland at the moment and practicing your faith, you're aware of all of the difficulty and problematic. And certainly when I returned to Ireland, I experienced that, and it saddens me. But it's really throughout the Western world, in Ireland in one way, and in the rest of the Western world in another way. But the green shoots that I see are young couples with young families, and they truly do seem to me to live the light of the faith. And that light then will radiate outward to the couples that they know, and to other people, to the children their children play with. And so it seems to me that there's a lot of hope embedded in that, the hope embedded in marriage, the hope embedded in the family, and the witness of their Christian lives. So we met a lot of young couples over the time we were there, and with young kids, and it was just such a joy to spend time with them. And that's a sign of hope.
Fantastic. And it's the idea of just the nucleus of the family again that does give us such encouragement. I know with the work that we're doing, we just had a marriage retreat there down in Knock a couple of weeks ago, and it was so inspiring to see the couples coming together and sort of that encouragement that it brings us when you see the nucleus, the marriage. But it's trying to reach out as well then to our young people and trying to give this idea of greatness. And you mentioned Jordan Peterson, and that is, I mean, he has obviously recognized a feeling in society, or a hunger in young men for a sense of purpose and a sense of dignity, and sort of a call to higher purpose than what they're being sold by the culture. I'm sure you're seeing a lot more role models over in Steubenville for young men to look up to. You're immersed in them there.
Yeah, thanks
Your
be to
neighbors
God. Yeah, God knew my weakness, and so he put me in a place where I could actually draw close to him. Yeah.
Would you say, just before we wrap up, that fraternity for men is important? And would you say that in your own story? Because a lot of people would complain that, the front of the church, maybe, is quite feminine now. There are a lot of women are active in various ministries in the church, and that, the men are less visible. Before we finish, could you wrap up on that, and how important fraternity has been to you and your own reversion back to the faith, and indeed to maintain you in the work that you do there?
Yeah, I think it's a great importance. So we're all working our way toward God, and it seems to me that friendship is the context of our working toward God. Without supporting friendships around us, it's rendered incredibly difficult to orient our lives correctly. And so I would think of this for woman in one way, and for man in another way. One of the signs of hope in relation to this in Ireland, I think, at the moment, are those men's sheds. Now, they're not specifically Catholic, but they are giving men an opportunity to meet over something healthy and be companions. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Sorry, go on ahead there.
Yeah, and I think the masculine way of doing this will be different than the feminine way, and that's good, and that's to be fostered and enjoyed and rejoiced in.
Mm-hmm. And there's obviously there's been different programs. I know my own husband has really thrived on now a renewed devotion to St. Joseph, and the Exodus program has helped him in terms of fraternity. And we of course have, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, we have the Men's Rosary campaign in Ireland, which is going from strength to strength, where men are coming together to publicly pray the Rosary. And there's a great amount of fraternity in that, and for men to be so, you know, publicly even on their knees in devotion to Our Lady. You know, we spoke with Carrie Grace, you know, Our Lady being the most powerful woman in the world, and how beautiful it is when we see men, you know, kneeling in prayer before our Blessed
And it
Mother.
isn't that public proclamation of the faith by man is significant within the family. So we've all heard the statistics of how the faith transfers to the next generation is largely determined by whether or not the father holds the faith and how he witnesses to it. Of course, this witness is going to be different than the mother. And there is something true in what you said about the kind of feminine face of the church at the moment. And it would seem to me that, well, men need to take the responsibility to, not in a feminine way, but in a thoroughly masculine way, witness to the faith. And I don't think there could be anything more masculine than kneeling, praying the rosary before the Blessed Virgin. That's a wonderful witness. My spiritual director for many years, Father Pat Dwyer, a Palatine from Thurles, said that he was powerfully impacted by seeing his father kneel before his bed one morning as he got up and prepared himself for school. And he spoke about this as if it was vividly present to him. And now he was an elderly man in his 70s. And he saw his father there praying without anyone seeing him. His father didn't know his son was watching from a distance. And that spoke to him. God is real. God is important. He's the most important thing. I come to him first in the day. And it seems to me that Father Pat's whole life was in a way determined by that moment, the witness of his father in faith, praying the rosary before the bed in the morning. So, men have a big role here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful sort of vision for us to finish up on too, that, you know, that idea. And it can be the simplicity. You know, we you know, I know that you're very much involved in the philosophy and the highbrow area of our faith, but like even when you say there, the combination of that with just the simplicity of prayer as well, there's such a need for both. Well, Rob, thank you so much for your time and for sharing. I mean, I'm going to go back over that. There's so many little nuggets in there, and I think we'll try and put some of the links into the description of those documents that you talked about. But thank you so much for your time, and God bless with all the work that you're doing there. And I believe you're heading to Austria maybe as well. So jet setting.
Back to the abroad campus for a semester or a year this coming year. And it's going to be a joy to be back there. I spent a lot of my years teaching in Gaming, Austria, and so I'm looking forward to that. I'll also miss the main campus here, the abundance of life that you have at this main campus. Thank you so much for having me on, Lisa. It's been a real joy chatting with you. Getting to know Catherine's sister and seeing more of Maddie and Catherine's family is a joy for me.
Oh, it's all about family and friends and connection and living and growing together and supporting each other in this journey through life, through the Valley of Tears, as we mentioned it before. But thank you so much for your time. And to all our viewers, thank you for taking the time to join us and to listen in today. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel. Drop us a comment, drop us an email. We love to hear from you and love to hear how our show and our work is impacting you. Now, so this is only the first of our series on men called to greatness. So join us next week. We're hoping to have Father Brendan Kilcoyne, and then we'll have Patrick and Crystal, our executive director, will join us this month as well. So we have lots and lots to delve into. So please don't forget to join us next Friday at 1. Remember that we at HLI Ireland are working and praying for an Ireland where God is first, life is sacred, and the family is cherished. Until next time, God bless.